They told him she was gone. Not dead, but empty, a shell left behind after a tragic accident. The doctors at Oakhaven, the most expensive facility on the East Coast, called it irreversible cognitive decoupling. Her father, a hardened Navy SEAL commander who had survived the impossible, was finally brought to his knees by a man in a white coat. But they didn't count on Jessie. She was a rookie nurse, a nobody with a stained record and a secret from the battlefield. She saw what the experts missed, and when she decided to break protocol, to use a banned military technique, she didn't just risk her license, she risked her life. This is the story of the day the silence broke. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. That's how Jessie Bennett felt standing outside the glass and steel monolith of the Oakhaven Neuro Rehab Center. She felt slick, slippery, like she was trying to slide into a life she didn't belong in. She adjusted the collar of her scrubs. They were navy blue, crisp and stiff. Not the faded blood-stained greens she was used to seeing in her father's old photos. Jessie was 24, but her eyes looked 30. She had the kind of resume that made HR directors squint top of her class in practical's bottom of the barrel in deference to authority. She'd been fired from her last rotation at County General for arguing with a resident about a dosage error. She was right, of course, but in medicine being right is less important than being subordinate. Oakhaven was her last shot. It was a private facility, the kind that didn't advertise. It was where the wealthy hid their broken things. Bennett. The voice was sharp, like a scalpel slicing through the hum of the lobby. Jessie turned to see the head nurse, Mrs. Gable. Gable was a woman built of angles and starch, her face set in a permanent expression of disapproval. "Yes, ma'am. Jessie Bennett, reporting for the night shift." "You're late," Gable said, checking a watch that cost more than Jessie's car. "My shift starts at 1900. It's 1855, Jessie replied, keeping her voice even. Gable narrowed her eyes. "At Oakhaven, on time is late. Early is on time. Follow me. And don't scuff the floors." The tour was a blur of beige hallways and hushed tones. The air smelled of lavender and money masking the underlying scent of antiseptic and decay. They passed rooms that looked more like hotel suites than hospital wards. "We value privacy above all else." Gable recited her heels, clicking a rhythmic warning on the linoleum. "Our patients are sensitive cases, high-profile families, senators, tech moguls, military brass, which brings us to your assignment." They stopped at the end of the West Wing. Room 404. There was no name on the door, just a small red light indicating advanced monitoring. "You are assigned to Chloe Miller," Gable said, lowering her voice. "She is a level 4 traumatic brain injury, complete unresponsive wakefulness syndrome. She's been here 6 months. "Vegetative state?" Jessie asked. "We prefer minimal conscious variance." A deep, smooth voice interrupted them. Jessie turned to see a man approaching. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a lab coat that fit him like a bespoke suit. This was Dr. Alistair Sterling, the chief neurologist. The man was a legend in the field, and he knew it. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It stopped at his mouth, cold and practiced. "Dr. Sterling." Gable practically curtsied. "This is the new agency nurse, Bennett." Sterling looked Jessie up and down, dismissing her in a single glance. "Another one. Try not to break anything, Miss Bennett. Chloe Miller is a delicate case." "I've handled TBI patients before, Doctor," Jessie said, bristling slightly. "Not like this," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a condescending purr. Chloe's spinal cord was compromised at the C2 level, combined with diffuse axonal injury. She is, for all intents and purposes, a statue. Your job is hydration, turning her to prevent bed sores and maintaining the illusion of care for her father. Do not engage the family. Do not offer hope where there is none. Am I clear? Crystal, Jessie said. Good. Sterling turned to the keypad on the door. Her father is inside, Commander Jack Miller. Do not speak to him unless spoken to. He does not handle the staff well. The door hissed open. The room was dim lit only by the glowing readouts of the life support machines. It was silent save for the rhythmic whoosh hiss of the ventilator assist. In the center of the room lay Chloe Miller. She was young, maybe 22, with pale skin and hair spread out like a halo on the pillow. She looked like Sleeping Beauty, if Sleeping Beauty had a feeding tube taped to her cheek. But it was the figure in the corner that sucked the air out of the room. He sat in a rigid armchair, back straight, hands resting on his knees. Commander Jack Iron Miller. Even in the gloom, he was terrifying. He wore civilian clothes, a grey tactical shirt, and jeans. But he radiated military tension. His face was a map of scars and hard decisions. He didn't look up when they entered. He just stared at his daughter's chest, watching it rise and fall, as if his sheer will was the only thing keeping her breathing. Commander Dr. Sterling, said his voice, taking on a fake warmth. This is the new night nurse. Miller didn't move. He didn't blink. She'll be taking over the vitals check. Sterling continued unfazed. He checked the chart at the foot of the bed. Stats remain unchanged, I see. No cortical activity. No, Miller said. His voice was like grinding gravel. As expected. Sterling sighed, a sound that feigned sympathy, but screamed boredom. We discussed the transfer, Commander. The hospice in Vermont offers a very comfortable... No, Miller said again. Louder. Jack, Sterling said, stepping closer, putting a hand on the bed rail. It's been 6 months. The endowment fund covers a year. But realistically, the brain matter has atrophied. You're guarding an empty room. Jessie saw Miller's hand twitch. It was a subtle movement, his right hand curling into a fist, the knuckles turning white. She recognized that tension. It was the coil of a snake before the strike. Get out, Miller whispered. Sterling straightened his coat. Very well. Nurse Bennett, handle the catheter change. I'll be in my office. The doctor swept out, taking the air of authority with him. Gable followed, shooting Jessie a warning glare. The door hissed shut, leaving Jessie alone with the statue on the bed and the statue in the chair. Jessie moved quietly to the bedside. She checked the IV drip. Saline and a mild sedative. Why a sedative, she thought. If she's brain dead, why does she need a sedative? She reached for Chloe's wrist to check her pulse manually. Her fingers brushed the girl's skin. It was cool, dry. Don't hurt her, the voice came from the corner. Jessie jumped internally but kept her hands steady. She turned to look at the commander. He was finally looking at her. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of weeks without real sleep. They were blue, piercing, and utterly hopeless. I won't, sir, Jessie said softly. I'm just checking her radial pulse. The machines can lag. Miller grunted. The last one scratched her arm. I had him removed. I have soft hands, Jessie said. She found the pulse. It was thready but rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. She looked at Chloe's face. There was no slackness in the jaw, which was common for TBI patients. Her face looked tense, not peaceful. She was a climber, Miller said suddenly. He stood up, walking to the window. Free solo. No ropes. Fell 50 feet in Yosemite. I'm sorry, Jessie said. She survived the fall, Miller said, looking out at the rain. Broke half the bones in her body. But her mind... Sterling says the impact sheared the connections. Lights are on nobody's home. Jessie looked back at Chloe. She checked the pupil response with her penlight. Fixed and dilated. No reaction. Standard. She moved to check the reflex in the foot, the Babinski sign. She ran the end of the pen up the sole of Chloe's foot. The big toe flared upward. Positive Babinski indicates upper motor neuron damage, consistent with the diagnosis. But then Jessie saw it. As she pulled the sheet back up, her hand brushed Chloe's shin. Just a light friction. Chloe's pinky finger on her left hand twitched. Not a tremor. Not a spasm. A distinct, sharp jerk. Jessie froze. She looked at the monitor. Heart rate 72. Steady. What? Miller asked, turning around. He didn't miss a thing. Nothing, Jessie said quickly. She didn't want to give false hope. That was the cardinal sin. Just a muscle spasm. It happens. Spasms happen every day at 0400, Miller said suspiciously. Never at 1900. Jessie finished her rounds in silence, but her mind was racing. She had seen spasms before. They were usually rhythmic, repetitive. This was singular, reactive. She sat at the nurse's station outside the room, an hour later, pulling up Chloe's digital file. She wasn't supposed to access the deep history. Sterling had restricted it, but Jessie knew a few workarounds. Her ex-boyfriend was an IT specialist for the VA, and he'd taught her how to bypass the basic administrative firewalls of medical databases. She scrolled through the MRI scans. Severe damage to the cerebral cortex. Brainstem intact. She looked at the medication log. 0800 lorazepam. 1,200 lorazepam. 2,000 lorazepam. Anxiety meds. High doses. Why are you sedating a vegetable? Sterling, Jessie thought. Unless you're afraid, she might wake up and scream. By 3 a.m., the hospital was a tomb. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system. Commander Miller had finally fallen asleep in the armchair, his head lolling onto his chest, snoring softly. Jessie entered the room for the scheduled turning. Patients had to be rotated every 4 hours to prevent pressure ulcers. It was heavy work, usually requiring 2 nurses, but Jessie was strong and Chloe was frail. She moved to the side of the bed. Okay, Chloe, she whispered. We're going to roll to your left, on 3. She always talked to them. It was habit, or maybe superstition. She slid her hands under Chloe's shoulders and hips. 1, 2, 3. She rolled the girl onto her side, propping her with pillows. As she adjusted the girl's head, Jessie noticed something behind Chloe's ear. A small scar hidden by the hairline. It looked like an insertion point. A shunt. No, it was too small. Jessie leaned in closer. She smelled the faint chemical scent of the shampoo the day staff used, but beneath that, something metallic. Suddenly, the heart monitor beeped, a fast staccato rhythm. Beep, 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 heart rate spiking. 90, 100, 110. Miller jerked awake instantly. What is it? What's happening? Heart rate spike, Jessie said, checking the leads. She might be in pain. She can't feel pain. Sterling's voice echoed in her head. The cortex is gone. Check her oxygen, Miller barked. standing over Jessie's shoulder. "Oxygen is 98. She's fine physically," Jessie said. She looked at Chloe's face. The girl's eyes were still closed, but her eyelids were fluttering rapidly. REM sleep. No, this was too violent. Jessie instinctively reached out and placed her hand firmly on Chloe's sternum. It was a grounding technique. "Chloe, you're safe. Calm down." And then it happened. Chloe's lips parted. A sound escaped. Not a moan, not a groan. A sharp, high-pitched intake of breath. A gasp. And her right hand, the one that had been limp for 6 months, shot up and grabbed Jessie's wrist. The grip was weak, trembling, but it was there. Jessie gasped and pulled back, but she didn't break the hold. She looked at the hand clutching her blue scrub top. The fingers were white-knuckled. "Did you see that?" Miller whispered. He was trembling. The Iron Commander looked like he was about to shatter. "I see it," Jessie whispered. She's holding you." The grip lasted for 3 seconds, then dissolved. The hand fell back to the bed. The heart rate monitor slowed. 100, 90, 80, 72. Silence returned. Miller stared at Jessie. Sterling said that was impossible. He said her motor functions were severed. Jessie looked at the commander, then at the door to ensure they were alone. She made a decision. "Commander," she said, her voice low, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened the day of the accident. Not what the report says." "What you saw." Miller ran a hand over his face. "I wasn't there when she fell. I was deployed. I got the call. They airlifted her here directly. Sterling took over. He performed emergency surgery to relieve cranial pressure. He saved her life." "Did he?" Jessie asked. Miller's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Jessie said, walking to the foot of the bed and picking up the chart, that a patient with a severed spinal cord at C2 cannot grab a wrist. It's physiologically impossible. Even a reflex wouldn't have that kind of targeted motor control. "So she's healing." Hope, raw and painful, flooded Miller's voice. "Or she was never severed to begin with," Jessie said. The words hung in the air like surya. "Explain," Miller commanded. The soldier was back. "There's a discrepancy, sir. The meds, the sedatives. If her brain is disconnected from her body, sedatives wouldn't lower her heart rate this effectively because the feedback loop is broken. But they are working, which means the signal is getting through." Jessie hesitated. She knew what she was about to suggest sounded insane. It sounded like something her father would have said after 3 whiskeys. "My father," Jessie began, "was a medic in the 75th Ranger Regiment. He served in Mogadishu and Panama. He didn't have fancy equipment. He had his hands and his instincts." Miller nodded slowly. "I know the type." "He taught me things," Jessie said. "Unofficial things. Ways to check for locked-in syndrome that aren't in the textbooks because they're considered archaic, aggressive." "Locked in?" Miller asked. "You mean she's in there awake?" "I think she might be," Jessie said, looking at Chloe. "I think she's screaming inside her own head, and the sedatives are just keeping her too drugged to fight the paralysis." Miller walked to the bed. He took his daughter's limp hand. He looked at Jessie. "Do it," he said. "Sir, whatever test, whatever technique, do it. If Sterling finds out I lose my license, you could be kicked out of the facility." Miller looked at her. "Nurse Bennett, if my daughter is in there, I don't care about your license. And if Sterling is lying, I'll burn this building down. Do the test." Jessie nodded. She took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple plastic comb. "This isn't high-tech," Jessie warned. "It's called the fingernail fulcrum. It's used to differentiate between a coma and a psychological freeze response in the field." "Show me," Miller said. Jessie moved to the bed. "I need to apply pressure to the nail bed. It hurts. It hurts a lot. If she's vegetative, the body will pull away a spinal reflex. But if she's conscious, if she's in there, her brain will try to override the reflex to stop the pain source. She won't pull away. She'll try to push me away. It's a different neural pathway. Hurt her to save her," Miller murmured. "Do it." Jessie took Chloe's index finger. She placed the teeth of the comb against the sensitive cuticle. She looked at Chloe's face. "I'm sorry, Chloe," she whispered. She pressed down, hard. For a second, nothing. Then Chloe's arm didn't jerk back. It didn't flinch away. Instead, the arm stiffened. The shoulder rotated forward, and the hand, trembling violently, moved toward Jessie's hand, trying to bat it away. Jessie released the pressure instantly. Chloe's eyes flew open. They weren't the dead, glassy eyes of a vegetable. They were wide, terrified, and bluer than the ocean. They locked onto Jessie's face. There was intelligence there. There was fear. And then just as quickly, the eyelids fluttered and closed. The monitor spiked again, then settled. Jessie backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. Miller was frozen, staring at his daughter's face. "She looked at you," he whispered. "She looked right at you." "She's in there," Jessie said, her voice shaking. "She's not brain dead. She's trapped." Miller turned to Jessie. A tear tracked through the stubble on his cheek. He wiped it away angrily. "Why? Why would Sterling lie?" "I don't know," Jessie said. "But we're going to find out. But we can't do it here. If Sterling knows we know, he'll up the sedatives. He'll bury her." "Then what do we do?" Miller asked. "I can't move her. He has legal guardianship over her medical decisions due to the specialized care clause in the contract. I signed it. I signed everything he gave me." Jessie's mind raced. She was a rookie, a nobody. She was up against a medical titan. But she looked at the commander, a man who had led men into hell and back, and she realized she wasn't alone. "We need proof," Jessie said. "Undeniable proof. And to get that, we need to wake her up fully. Just for a minute." "How?" "There is a technique," Jessie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My dad called it the anchor. It's not approved. It involves stimulating the vagus nerve while simultaneously inducing a hypoxic stress response. It forces the brain to reboot. It's dangerous. It could kill her." Miller looked at his daughter lying still and silent. "She's already dead, Jessie. This is just a long funeral. I want my daughter back." Jessie nodded. "Okay. But we need supplies, and we need to do it when Sterling is gone. Tonight is Tuesday. He plays golf on Wednesdays. We do it tomorrow night." "Tomorrow," Miller agreed. Suddenly the door handle turned. Jessie spun around, grabbing a clipboard, pretending to check the IV. Miller slumped back into his chair, feigning sleep. The door opened. It wasn't Sterling. It was the night janitor, an old man named Ben, pushing a mop bucket. "Just emptying the trash," Ben mumbled, eyes on the floor. "Go ahead, Ben," Jessie said, letting out a breath she didn't know she was holding. As Ben left, Jessie looked at the camera in the corner of the room. The little red light was blinking. "Does Sterling watch the tapes?" she asked Miller. "He says he reviews them for quality assurance," Miller said. Jessie felt a chill run down her spine. "If he saw that hand grab." "He didn't," Miller said, standing up and moving to block the camera's view of the bed with his broad back. "Because from now on, I'm not moving from this spot." Jessie looked at the commander. The hopelessness was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. The soldier had a mission again. "Get your supplies, Nurse Bennett," Miller said. "We're going to war." The next 24 hours were a lesson in subterfuge. Jessie Bennett wasn't a spy, but she had grown up in base housing, learning how to sneak out past MP checkpoints to meet boys. She knew how to move without being seen. Her shift began at 1900 hours again. The handover with the day nurse, a chatty woman named Brenda, who seemed more interested in her crochet than her patient, was brief. "Doctor, Sterling came by twice," Brenda chirped, packing her yarn. "Checked the IVs personally. He's very hands-on with this one, isn't he?" "Must be the money." "Must be," Jessie said, forcing a smile. Once Brenda was gone, Jessie locked the door. She turned to Miller. The commander looked like he had aged 10 years in a day, but his eyes were alert. "Did you get it?" he asked. Jessie patted her scrub pocket. 2 ampules of epinephrine, a bag of saline ice, and a syringe of atropine, just in case her heart stops completely. Miller nodded grimly. "And the intel. I couldn't access the main server," Jessie whispered, pulling a folded piece of paper from her shoe. "But I found the trash logs from the pharmacy. Sterling isn't just giving her sedatives. He's administering a compound called NeuroX7. It's not FDA approved. It's experimental." Miller took the paper. "What does it do?" "Theoretically, it forces neural regeneration. It's supposed to regrow brain tissue. But the side effect is massive synaptic firing seizures, hallucinations, pain. That's why he keeps her sedated. If she wakes up while on this stuff, her brain would literally overprocess and burn out. He's using your daughter as a human incubator for his miracle drug." Miller's hand crumpled the paper. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "He's growing a patent inside her skull. If we prove she's conscious," Jessie said, "we prove he's violating the Nuremberg Code. We prove torture." "Then let's wake her up," Miller said. He stood up and walked to the bed. He looked down at Chloe. "Sweetheart, this is going to be rough. I need you to fight. You hear me? Fight like a Miller." Jessie moved to the head of the bed. She checked the monitors. Heart rate 70. BP 110/70. Stable. "The anchor," Jessie explained, her voice trembling slightly, "relies on the mammalian dive reflex. It's a primal response. When cold water hits the face, the body shunts blood to the brain and heart to survive drowning. We're going to trigger that. Then I'm going to stimulate the vagus nerve to drop her heart rate, and then I'm going to cut her oxygen." "Cut it," Miller asked, "just for 20 seconds. It creates a panic response in the brainstem. It forces a reboot. It overrides the sedation because the body thinks it's dying. It has to wake up to survive." Miller looked at the oxygen tube taped to Chloe's nose. "You're going to suffocate her." "I'm going to remind her body that it wants to live," Jessie corrected. She prepared the ice pack. She drew the epinephrine into a syringe, setting it on the bedside table. "If she flatlines, you hit her with this, straight into the thigh." "Understood," Miller said. He took the syringe. His hand was steady as a rock. "Okay," Jessie said. She looked at the clock. 2 a.m. "Kill the lights." Miller flipped the switch. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the green and red LEDs of the machines. "Ready? Execute," Miller whispered. Jessie moved fast. She didn't let herself think about the fact that she was technically assaulting a patient. She placed the bag of saline ice directly over Chloe's eyes and forehead. Step 1. The dive. Chloe's body reacted instantly. The heart monitor beeped faster for 3 seconds, then slowed drastically as the reflex kicked in. 100, 80, 60, 50. Heart rate dropping. Miller called out softly. Good, Jessie said. She moved her hands to the side of Chloe's neck, finding the carotid arteries and the vagus nerve running alongside them. She began a firm, rhythmic massage. Step 2. The vagus lock. Come on, Chloe, Jessie whispered. Find the floor. Find the anchor. The monitor dipped lower. 45, 40. Jessie, Miller warned. It's getting too low. Not yet, Jessie gritted out. We need the system to crash before we can reboot. She reached for the ventilator hose. Her hand hovered over the disconnect valve. Do it, Miller commanded. Jessie pulled the tube. The hiss of air stopped. The rhythmic whoosh of the machine was replaced by a terrifying silence. Step 3. The hypoxic trigger. 10 seconds passed. Chloe didn't move. 15 seconds. The heart rate was at 35. The monitor began a low, ominous alarm. Beep. Beep. She's not rebooting, Miller said, panic edging into his voice. She's just dying. Wait, Jessie stared at Chloe's chest. Come on. 20 seconds. Chloe's lips were turning blue. Abort, Miller shouted, reaching for the oxygen line. No, Jessie pushed his hand away. 5 more seconds. She's going into cardiac arrest. 3, 2. Suddenly, Chloe arched off the bed. It wasn't a spasm. It was a violent, full-body convulsion. Her back bowed her heels, drumming against the mattress. Her mouth opened wide, a silent scream tearing from her throat. Jessie slammed the oxygen tube back in and grabbed Chloe's shoulders. Breathe, Chloe, breathe, the monitor screamed. Heart rate 160. Oxygen saturation 70. Chloe gasped. It was a ragged, wet sound like a drowning woman breaking the surface. Her eyes flew open. They weren't just open. They were aware. She looked wildly around the room, her pupils dilating and contracting rapidly. She saw Jessie. She saw the ceiling. Then she saw Miller. Dad? The word was a croak, barely a whisper, but it was clear. Miller dropped to his knees beside the bed. He grabbed her hand, burying his face in her palm. I'm here, baby. I'm here. I've got at you. Dad, she whispered again, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. It hurts. I know, Miller sobbed. I know. We're going to get you out. Jessie checked the vitals. They were stabilizing. The reboot had worked. The anchor had held. The sedation was temporarily overridden by the adrenaline cascade. Chloe, Jessie said urgently, leaning in. We don't have much time. The drugs will pull you back under in a few minutes. We need to know. Did you fall? Chloe's eyes shifted to Jessie. Fear, raw and primal, flooded her gaze. She tried to shake her head. No fall, she wheezed. What happened? Miller asked, lifting his head. Who did this? Chloe's grip on her father's hand tightened. The car. The black car. What car? Sterling, she gasped. The name hung in the air like a curse. He was meeting someone at the cliff. I saw them. You saw a meeting? Jessie asked. Drug deal, Chloe whispered. Not medicine. Weapon. I saw the briefcase. He saw me. He pushed me. Miller's face went white, then a dark, terrifying shade of red. This wasn't medical malpractice. This was attempted murder to cover up a black market deal. He came down. Chloe continued, her voice fading as the adrenaline waned. He thought I was dead. He said, "Project Lazarus needs a subject anyway." The monitor began to slow. The eyelids began to droop. No, stay with me," Miller pleaded. "Tired," Chloe murmured. "Dad, the phone." I dropped it in the crevice. He didn't find it. It recorded everything. Her eyes rolled back. Her grip went slack. The monitor settled back into the slow, rhythmic beep of the coma. She was gone again. Jessie slumped against the wall, sweat soaking her scrubs. "She recorded it. Her phone is still at the cliff." Miller stood up. The grief was gone. In its place was a cold, lethal rage. He wasn't a father sitting by a bedside anymore. He was a SEAL commander with a target. "We have to get that phone," Miller said. But before Jessie could answer, the room suddenly flooded with light. The door burst open. Dr. Sterling didn't look like a doctor anymore. He stood in the doorway, flanked by 3 large men in security uniforms. But these weren't hospital security. They wore tactical vests and carried stun batons. Sterling was holding a tablet. On the screen, Jessie saw the live feed from the room, a hidden camera. "A very impressive technique, Nurse Bennett," Sterling said, his voice smooth and cold. "The anchor, isn't it crude? Dangerous, but effective. You pushed her." Miller said, his voice a low rumble. He stepped between the men and the bed. "I expedited her contribution to science," Sterling corrected. "Chloe stumbled upon a transaction that was sensitive. She became a liability. But I am a man who hates waste. I turned a liability into an asset. Her brain physiology was perfect for the X7 trials." "You're a monster," Jessie spat. "I'm a visionary," Sterling said. "And you two are trespassing." He nodded to the guards. "Secure the patient. Remove the trash." The 3 men moved in. Miller didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy IV pole and swung it like a bow staff. The metal base connected with the first guard's helmet, with a sickening clang. The guard dropped. "Run, Jessie," Miller roared. Jessie hesitated. "I'm not leaving you." "Get the phone," Miller shouted, tackling the second guard. "If you don't get the phone, she dies for nothing. Go!" Miller was 50 years old, tired and outnumbered, but he fought with the ferocity of a man possessing nothing left to lose. He broke the second guard's nose with a palm strike and threw him into the third. Sterling watched calmly from the doorway, then pulled a small taser from his lab coat. He waited for Miller to turn, then fired. The probes hit Miller in the neck. The commander convulsed and fell crashing into the bedside table. "Dad," Chloe moaned in her sleep, the noise disturbing her. "No," Jessie screamed. She grabbed a scalpel from the tray she had prepared, holding it out. Sterling stepped over Miller's twitching body. He looked at Jessie with amusement. "You have fire, Bennett. Pity. You would have made a good researcher." He snapped his fingers. The third guard, recovering from Miller's throw, lunged at Jessie. She slashed out, catching his arm, but he backhanded her hard. Jessie flew back, hitting the wall. Her vision swam. She tasted blood. "Take him to the isolation ward in the basement," Sterling ordered, pointing at Miller. "Sedate him heavily. We'll arrange a transfer to a psychiatric facility in the morning. Grief-induced psychosis. Very tragic." "And the girl?" the guard asked, pinning Jessie to the floor. "Prep the OR," Sterling said, looking at Chloe. "The trial is compromised. We need to harvest the tissue samples immediately. Terminate the subject." Jessie's heart stopped. Harvest. He was going to kill Chloe tonight. "Get her out of here," Sterling said, gesturing to Jessie. "Call the police. Tell them a disgruntled employee assaulted a doctor. Make sure she never works in medicine again." The guard hauled Jessie up. She was dizzy, her cheek swelling rapidly. She looked at Miller, who was barely conscious on the floor. His eyes met hers. He couldn't speak, but he tapped his fingers on the floor. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Go. Get it. The guard dragged Jessie out into the hallway. "Move it, sweetheart." As they reached the lobby, Jessie saw her chance. The guard was overconfident. He was holding her arm loosely, expecting a terrified nurse, not a fighter. They passed the janitor's cart. Jessie saw the spray bottle of industrial cleaner. She stumbled on purpose, falling to her knees. "Get up!" the guard growled, yanking her arm. As she rose, she grabbed the bottle with her free hand and sprayed it directly into his eyes. The guard screamed, letting go of her to claw at his face. Jessie didn't wait. She didn't run for the exit. She ran for the stairwell. She wasn't leaving. Not without the commander. And certainly not while Chloe was being prepped for harvest. She burst into the stairwell and bolted down. Not up to the exit, but down. To the basement. She had to get Miller out. And then they had to get to that cliff. But as she reached the bottom landing, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, hands shaking. It was a text message. From an unknown number. "I saw what you did on the cameras. I know a back way into the isolation ward. Meet me at the laundry chute. Ben." Ben. The old janitor. Jessie stared at the screen. It could be a trap. It probably was a trap. But she heard the elevator humming coming down to the basement. Sterling was coming. She shoved the phone in her pocket and ran toward the laundry room. It was the only play she had left. Jessie burst into the laundry room, her chest heaving. The room was hot, filled with the roar of industrial dryers and the smell of bleach. Ben, the old janitor, was there. But he wasn't leaning on a mop. He was standing by a breaker box, a set of schematics, spread out on a folding table. He looked up, his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "You made it," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "I locked the service door behind you. That gives us 3 minutes. "Who are you?" Jessie asked, wiping blood from her lip. Ben smiled grimly. 25th Infantry Division. 68. Tunnel rat. I know a thing or two about navigating tight spaces and spotting traps. I've been watching Sterling for years. I knew he was dirty, but I didn't know how dirty until I saw you and the commander on the monitors tonight." He pointed to the schematics. "They took Miller to Isolation 3. It's a padded room. Electronic lock. But the wiring runs through this chase here." He tapped a pipe running along the ceiling. "I can cut the power to the mag locks, but it will kill the lights on the whole lower level. You'll be blind." "I can work in the dark," Jessie said. "Good. Because Sterling has called in private security. They're sweeping the upper floors. We have to go under them." Ben handed her a heavy flashlight and a crowbar. "Get the commander. I'll get the transport." "Transport? I've got an old maintenance van in the loading dock. I'll bring it around to the south exit. You get the girl and the father. Go." Ben yanked a lever on the breaker box. Clunk! The hum of the dryers died. The lights flickered and died. The basement plunged into pitch blackness. Jessie clicked on the flashlight and ran. She navigated the corridors by memory and the narrow beam of light. She reached the door to Isolation 3. The magnetic lock was dead. She jammed the crowbar into the seam and heaved. The metal groaned, then popped open. Commander Miller was on the floor. They had zip-tied his hands and feet. He was groggy, blinking in the flashlight beam. "Jessie," he rasped. "We're leaving," she said, slicing the zip ties with the scalpel she still clutched in her pocket. Miller sat up, shaking his head to clear the drugs. "Chloe, the OR." "We're getting her." Miller stood up. He swayed, then steadied himself against the wall. The soldier was back. "Lead the way." They moved like shadows, up the service stairs to the surgical wing. The backup generators had kicked in, bathing the hallway in dim emergency red light. The OR prep room was ahead. 2 guards stood outside. "I'll draw them," Miller whispered. "You get inside. You're in no condition. Go." Miller stepped out into the hallway, roaring like a wounded bear. He grabbed a fire extinguisher off the wall and hurled it. It smashed into the far wall with a deafening clang, spraying white powder everywhere. The guards turned, startled. Miller charged. He was slower than before, but he was pure fury. He tackled the first guard, driving him into the floor. The second guard pulled a baton, striking Miller across the ribs. Miller grunted, but didn't let go. Jessie slipped past the melee and into the prep room. Dr. Sterling was there, scrubbing in at the sink. Chloe was on the gurney, hooked up to a portable monitor. Sterling turned his eyes, widening. "You persistent little—" He reached for a scalpel tray. Jessie didn't hesitate. She tackled him, driving her shoulder into his gut. They both crashed into the instrument table, sending steel tools clattering across the tile. Sterling was older, but he was desperate. He kicked Jessie in the face, scrambling to get up. He grabbed a syringe from the counter. "I'll kill her right now," he screamed, holding the needle over Chloe's IV port. "One push, and her heart stops." Jessie froze. Suddenly the door flew open. Miller stood there. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, holding the baton he had taken from the guard. He looked at Sterling, then at the needle. "Drop it," Miller said. The voice was death itself. "Get back," Sterling yelled, his hand shaking. "I own this city. I own the police. You can't touch me." "I'm not the police," Miller said. He threw the baton. It wasn't a wild throw. It spun through the air and struck Sterling's wrist with a sickening crack. Sterling screamed, dropping the syringe. Miller was on him in a second. He didn't kill him, though every muscle in his body wanted to. He knocked him unconscious with a single precise blow to the jaw. "Secure her," Miller said to Jessie, turning to drag a heavy surgical cabinet in front of the door. "We're barricaded, but not for long." "Ben is at the south dock," Jessie said, checking Chloe. She was stable. "Let's move." They unlocked the wheels of the gurney. They burst out the back door of the prep room, racing down the service corridor. The fire alarm was blaring now. Sprinklers hissed to life, soaking them instantly. They reached the loading dock just as Ben pulled up in a rusted white van. The back doors flew open. "Get her in!" Ben shouted, revving the engine. They loaded the gurney. Miller jumped in the back with Chloe. Jessie rode shotgun. As they peeled out of the parking lot, sirens wailed in the distance. But they weren't coming for Sterling. They were coming for them. Sterling had called it in as a kidnapping. "Where to?" Ben yelled over the rain. "North," Miller said from the back. "Dead Man's Drop." "The cliff." Ben looked at Jessie. "In this weather, it's the only way to end this," Jessie said. "Drive." The storm had turned the world into a blur of grey and black. The wind howled off the ocean, battering the cliffs of Dead Man's Drop. Ben parked the van in a dense thicket of pines a mile from the edge. "I'll stay with Chloe," he said, pulling a shotgun from under the seat. "Nobody touches her." Miller and Jessie ran through the woods. The mud sucked at their boots. The rain was like ice. They reached the edge. It was a sheer drop 200 feet down to the jagged rocks and the churning surf below. "She said a crevice," Miller shouted over the wind. "About 50 feet down, a red marker." He pulled a coil of climbing rope from his tactical bag. He had grabbed it from his car trunk. Before the ambulance took him days ago, he always kept a go bag. "I'm going down," Miller said, securing the line to a sturdy pine tree. "You're injured," Jessie argued. "Your ribs are broken. You can barely breathe." "It's my daughter," Miller said, tightening his harness. "If I fall, I fall. But I'm getting that phone." He didn't wait for permission. He stepped off the edge. Jessie watched the rope play out. She lay on her stomach, peering over the precipice. She could see Miller's headlamp bobbing in the darkness, a tiny star against the black rock. Minutes felt like hours. "I see it." Miller's voice crackled over the small radio he had given her. "Red marker. There's a ledge." Jessie held her breath. Suddenly, a spotlight hit her from the tree line. "Freeze!" Jessie spun around. Sterling hadn't waited for the police. He had come himself with 2 more of his private security contractors. They had rifles. "Pull him up," Sterling ordered, aiming a pistol at Jessie. "Slowly." Jessie looked at the rope, then at Sterling. "It's over, Sterling. The police are on their way." "The police work for the highest bidder," Sterling sneered. "Now pull!" Jessie grabbed the rope. She tugged 3 times the signal for danger. Below the rim, Miller stopped. He knew. "Cut the rope, Jessie." Miller's voice came over the radio. "Don't let them get the proof." "I'm not cutting you loose," Jessie screamed. Sterling fired a warning shot into the dirt near her hand. "Pull." Jessie started to haul the rope up. It was heavy. Agonizingly heavy. Her muscles burned. Sterling walked to the edge, peering down. "A tragic accident," he shouted into the wind. "Distraught father commits suicide at the sight of his daughter's fall. Nurse tries to save him. Slips. So sad." He raised his gun to shoot Jessie. Crack! A gunshot rang out, but it didn't come from Sterling. Sterling's shoulder exploded in a spray of red. He spun around, dropping his gun, screaming. Ben emerged from the trees, the shotgun smoking in his hands. "I told you," Ben yelled. "I was 25th Infantry. We don't leave people behind." The 2 security guards hesitated. They looked at Ben, then at the bleeding doctor. They were mercenaries, not martyrs. They lowered their rifles. "Get him up," Ben yelled at Jessie, keeping the shotgun trained on the guards. Jessie pulled. She pulled with everything she had left. She pulled until her fingers bled. A hand reached over the ledge, then another. Miller hauled himself over the lip of the cliff. He was soaked, covered in mud, gasping for air. But in his hand, gripped so tight his knuckles were white, was a waterproof Pelican case. He popped the latch. Inside sat a smartphone. Dry. Intact. Miller stood up, swaying. He walked over to Sterling, who was clutching his shoulder, writhing in the mud. Miller held up the phone. He pressed play on the screen. Even over the wind, the audio was clear. "The shipment is late, Sterling. The cartel isn't happy." "I handled it. The neuroagent is ready. We test it on the locals." Then a gasp, a scream. "No. Please." Then the sound of wind rushing. Sterling stopped screaming. He looked up at Miller, defeated. "It's over," Miller said. Sirens wailed in the distance. Real police this time. State troopers. Ben had made the call hours ago to the FBI field office, not the local cops. Miller looked at Jessie. He didn't salute. He didn't bow. He reached out and took her hand. "You saved her," he said. "We saved her," Jessie replied. 3 months later. The sun was shining on the veranda of the VA Rehabilitation Center. It was a different kind of facility, rougher, louder, filled with men and women missing limbs and battling demons. But the care was real. Jessie walked onto the patio carrying 2 coffees. She wore a new ID badge, Head Nurse Neurotrauma Unit. She walked over to a wheelchair by the railing. Chloe Miller was sitting there. She was thin, her hair cut short, a scar visible on her temple. Her movements were jerky, her speech still slow. But she was awake. She was alive. "Hey, Rockstar," Jessie said, handing her a smoothie. "Hey, boss." Chloe smiled. The smile was crooked, but it was the most beautiful thing Jessie had ever seen. Commander Miller was sitting next to her reading a book. He looked younger. The lines of stress were gone, replaced by laugh lines. "We got the letter today," Miller said, putting the book down. "From the board?" Jessie asked. "From the medical examiner?" Miller grinned. "Sterling got life, no parole. The Project Lazarus data was turned over to legitimate researchers. They think what he found might actually help people now that they aren't torturing them." Jessie looked out at the garden. "Funny how the world works." "One more thing," Miller said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a silver pin. It wasn't a military medal. It was an antique nursing pin shaped like a lamp. "This belonged to my mother," Miller said. "She was a nurse in Korea. She always said the hardest battles aren't fought with guns. They're fought with patience." He pinned it to Jessie's scrubs. "You're part of the unit now, Bennett. Dismissed." Jessie touched the pin. Tears pricked her eyes. She looked at Chloe, who was watching a butterfly land on her knee. She looked at the commander. She realized she wasn't sliding into a life she didn't belong in anymore. She had finally found her footing. "Sir." "Yes, sir," Jessie whispered. The silence was broken, and for the first time in a long time, it was peaceful. And that is how a rookie nurse and a retired warrior took down a medical empire. Jessie didn't just save a life that night. She exposed a darkness hiding in plain sight. It reminds us that sometimes the experts are wrong, and the only credentials that matter are gut instinct and the courage to act. Chloe is still recovering today, walking with a cane, but she's walking. And Jessie. She's still a nurse, still fighting for the ones nobody else will listen to. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories of real-life heroes and impossible odds, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. What would you have done in Jessie's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and trust your gut.